We've been talking on and off about intellectual honesty. And as strong critical thinkers, as people who are building up their mental might, it's really important not to fall into any of the traps that cause us to be intellectually dishonest. It can be difficult to walk that straight and narrow because we are surrounded by all kinds of examples of intellectual dishonesty. Let's talk about propaganda. I know that sounds like something from, the Cold War way back when, perestroika. But propaganda is alive and well, and it's in every society. You could even say that simple advertising is a form of propaganda. Propaganda simply means anytime you are delivering information that is biased or misleading or self-serving, and you're using that information to promote your own cause or your own point of view. You're misconstruing the facts to try to convince people to see things your way. Propaganda uses loaded language, and that language, it's loaded up to try to produce an emotional response rather than a rational response. Because as you know, emotions are powerful, and people can get swept up by their emotions and can then follow a cause or adopt a point of view because of that emotional response. Here are some examples of types of propaganda. You've probably seen all of these. If you follow politics, you probably see them on a daily basis. They're that prevalent. One example of propaganda is name calling or labeling or an ad hominem attack. An ad hominem attack means an attack on the person or the character of a person rather than sticking to the issues. So if somebody says, "You're a Nazi," because of a particular belief that you hold, that's an ad hominem attack. Having a certain belief, even if it is an undesirable belief, does not necessarily make a person a Nazi. That's a character attack. So we have to be careful with these. They are occurring all over the place. They usually are grossly exaggerated and unfair to the individual. They also take the discussion away from the issue, and therefore they're pretty unproductive. The second type of propaganda is anytime you see a bandwagon approach. When you seize on people's FOMO, their fear of missing out, or when you cause them to think that everybody is doing something, so they should too, that sort of bandwagon appeal, well, that's a form of propaganda. It might be an embedded misrepresentation of the truth because you're trying to emotionally stir someone and cause them to come over to your way of thinking. Very common tactic for propaganda is repetition. You've probably heard the old saying, if you say something often enough, people will eventually believe it. Well, be careful when you see a lot of repetition, because maybe that's exactly what someone's trying to do. I always think about it this way. Whenever I start to see a movie trailer, a preview with extreme frequency, I tend to think maybe that movie isn't as good as I'd like it to be. If it can't stand on its own merits and they're promoting it heavily to try to get people in there on the first weekend when it debuts, that's probably a pretty good indicator that the movie isn't going to have any staying power. It's not good enough to stand up on its own. So watch out for that frequency and repetition. You've probably heard of the propaganda technique of card stacking. That's where you only show the cards that are the favorable ones. You don't tell the whole story. You omit certain details or certain facts to try to bias people and to only give them enough information to cause them to see the favorable view of whatever it is you're offering to them. Oh, here's one. I really dislike this type of propaganda. It's a little bit like ad hominem, but it stands alone because this is when we take a group of people and we try to diminish them or dehumanize them in any way. All blank people are somehow morally inferior, or all people in that category are less than. And I'm not talking about racial stereotypes or gender stereotypes, although that certainly is problematic. I'm talking about even in a workplace, the IT team versus the operations team, those people over there, and there's clash. And we then begin to not view those individuals as people who have their own ideas and their own reasons for doing things, but because they're part of that group, or they expressed that opinion, or they voted that way, or they have those beliefs, that somehow they are not worthy of the same dignity and respect we would give to some other group. That's propaganda at work. Propaganda could also involve any type of half-truths or any superlatives. Superlatives, if you're hearing words like she always, he never, those kinds of superlatives, that's not true. First of all, it's impossible for anything to be always or never. So when you hear them, just know that you're hearing an exaggeration, and there's some propaganda folded into that. Okay, be on the lookout. As a critical thinker, you don't want to accidentally be a purveyor of propaganda. You don't want to pass it along. And as a critical thinker, you want to be discerning. Anytime that you are exposed to propaganda, ask questions, call it out, look closer, try to figure out why someone is advocating so hard for you to believe what they want you to believe, but isn't sharing everything with you. What's that about? You have a right to know. So look a little closer, become a little more introspective, and never accept propaganda at face value.